Is Find Your Flow, a show about navigating the complexities of life and business through the lens of curiosity. I'm your host, Angelique, and I bring together experts to deliver responsibly curated conversations and perspectives that aim to progress people and the planet. The global aesthetics and injectables market size reached $7.1 billion in 2021 and is expected to reach $12.2 billion by 2027. In this segment, we explore the significant role that nurse injectors play in the rapidly growing field of aesthetics. We delve into the business side of aesthetics and even shed light on how nurse injectors contribute to the industry's success. So from their specialized skills to the unique perspectives they bring, nurse injectors are transforming the landscape of the cosmetic procedures and client experiences, or I should say patient experiences. And we'll even explore some of the downsides of the business. So I'm so very excited to introduce our guest today is nurse practitioner Christin Agens. She has spent the last 10 years in healthcare and the past 5 of those in aesthetics across various modalities and disciplines with a focus on natural results. So Christin, nurse injectors are an indispensable part of the aesthetics business, and I'm super excited to share your story today. Christin and I have known each other for a very long time now. Yeah. We became fast friends from working in this industry over the last several years. And it's just been incredible to see you grow as an aesthetic provider. So to kick things off, tell us a little bit more about your journey, how you got started, and your transition from working in the hospitals into the aesthetic space.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, Angel. So yeah, I've been in healthcare. It feels like forever. I feel like I've worn so many different hats. And that's one of the great parts about being a nurse is you kind of get to evolve in your nursing career, but try to find what your part in that is. Mm-hmm. So I started 10 years ago working in the hospital, and I loved that. I worked in the ICU recovering people from open heart surgery and lung surgery, and it was great. I went back to school and got my nurse practitioner, and then after that, I was working at 2 major hospitals doing inpatient endocrinology and seeing patients, but I didn't really have a super hands-on role with that. I was looking at numbers and educating patients, but I wasn't, doing procedures or getting my, hands dirty, which I kind of missed from the ICU. So I was on the patient side of the aesthetic industry, and I always have been interested in, beauty and wellness, and started doing, found a job that I could do at part-time while still working in the hospital. And I just fell in love and knew that was what, despite how many, hurdles I was going to have to jump through, that was what the right career path for me was. So that's kind of how I fell into it. And now I just can't get out. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a fun industry too, to be able to use artistic talents and, help bring confidence to, people on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. And, I think it's an interesting field because I see a lot of nurses going into aesthetics. Do you think that plays, do you think that everything going on in the hospital systems today is the biggest driver, or what do you think is the biggest driver attracting nurses to the profession today?
I think that, I get contacted all the time. I even have something on my phone that is for when people ask me how to get into this industry, because it is a question I hear so much that it's a saved note, because it's not an easy answer. And I think that a lot of times nurses or people see it as really an ideal job, and that I don't want to say it's easy, but it has all these perks, and they see it as something that they're like, oh, well, I could step away and do this part-time, or, it might be an easier career for me. And I always say that's actually the opposite. For me, I've, done a little bit of everything. And this is the one thing where I feel like I am constantly learning. I'm, constantly feeling like I need to be stepping up my practice. And I feel like I've spent the most time invested in my education and just being good at what I do. And I think that sometimes it's seen as almost like a fun, easy cush job, and it really isn't. So I think that sometimes that's the appeal, but there's actually not a lot of providers that do this when you compare other types of nurses. I mean, the amount of nurses that are in one hospital in the area, we don't have that many aesthetic providers in North Carolina. So it's pretty niche, and it takes a very specific type of person to be good at it, to be honest.
That's also reminds me of, I mean, I know with you, like there's a very entrepreneurial and business side to the aesthetics world too. And I feel like you kind of have to have a little bit of that understanding of like, okay, like, you can make more money, but it's patient satisfaction, it's patient care. And I think that's a little bit of a disconnect that some people can have today. And we'll get into that topic more of just like, this isn't just like a beauty service. This is a medical service.
It's a medical service, and you have to also be really, I mean, there's so many different levels from it. I mean, you have to be good with your hands. You have to be good at procedures. I mean, my dexterity, I would say, is like gone from a 2 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10 just from doing procedural things all day and working. And, you know, it is still hard on your body, but you have to be smart. You have to know what you're doing. You have to have a medical mindset, but then you also have to be, you know, you have to relate to people. You have to be kind. You have to really work on those relationships, because aside from everything else in healthcare that I've done, this is the one where, I mean, I have patients that have seen me since, you know, almost day one. And those relationships and knowing kind of where we started, and half the time, you know, patients will come in and they're just there to kind of catch up. They're like, oh, I was so excited to come back. I heard you got a puppy. And, you know, it's part of it is that too, is you become, you know, in a professional way, friends with these people and really connect with them.
Right. It's relationship based. And I think there's also the component of, you know, as an entrepreneur and building a business, like you have to build those relationships. I mean, that's business development all day. That's business development 101, create relationships with your people. And I think there's the genuine sense of what comes out when, you know, patients sit in that chair. And again, like the confidence that you breathe into them, the, you know, different perspectives that you're able to give them. You know, I'll see some of your before and afters where you go on 2, 3, 4-year journeys with some of these people, and to see their smile from day one and then the smile that they have the time after is, you know, that's something special for sure. When it comes to the business side of things, you know, what is something that I guess stands out for you, or was the learning curve for you getting into switching over to the aesthetics world?
I mean, I think a lot of things. I think number one, I guess it's not necessarily a learning curve, but it's just something that I've always had to stay true to throughout this entire process, is that all of healthcare is a form of business. I mean, even when you're going into a hospital, they're making a profit. So you know, and I've been on the side of patients and, you know, seeing my, you know, mom and dad in the hospital, and seeing, you know, recommendations are also about profit sometimes. So, but one thing that I've always stayed true to is that I will never recommend a treatment that I don't think will benefit somebody. I will never recommend something that I don't think that they would want or would like the result. And I think that's part of it, because it is a business. So sales are sales, just like when you go to a store or when you're a company or anything like that. But I want to recommend things to people that are the best bang for their buck, that work within their budget, and that are safe for them. But at the end of the day, it's aesthetics. So I always tell people, you're not coming in and it's, you know, I've worked on the side of diagnosing and prescribing in the hospital, where I say, here's your diagnosis and here's what I need you to start on. Here's the medication I'm starting you on. And that's different. This is, hey, here's your concern. Here's your, what you're looking to achieve. And here's 10 different ways that we can work towards those goals. And here's the pricing on it. And here's what that looks like long term. And at the end of the day, they have to look at that and say, okay, what's within my budget? What am I willing to spend here? And what are my priorities? Because most people can't do all 10 things. Most people have to choose a couple to start at. And they also, there's a fear component of, well, if I do this thing, will it actually give me what I want? And so part of my role is constantly just guiding people and saying, here are your different options and here's the risks and benefits and what that may look like, but everyone is different in how they respond to things. And, here's what I'm recommending for you. So part of it is just always staying true to only recommending things for people that I think will benefit them. And then the other side of it too is also not cutting people off from a choice because I think they can't afford it. So saying, I think a lot of times I would say, well, they don't seem like this is in their budget, but they haven't even told me their budget. But it's my job to offer them everything and say, here's what, if it were, if I could have, if budget wasn't an issue, if money wasn't an issue, here's what I would do for you. If everything was free, this would be your plan for my year.
Right.
And then you have to choose what's right for you there. It's unfair for me to make those choices for you because I don't control your finances. So that's part of it too, from the business aspect. So.
And you're giving them all the information that they need up front. And that's patient advocacy. I mean, I think that's, a learned skill set from, I think, what you probably gained from your experience in the hospital is bringing that into the same setting and letting them know, here are your options. It's a little bit different of a modality too, but it's, you have to stay true to that. And I think, anytime, it's just interesting because you go from, in the hospitals, like you said, it's a business, but then the nurses specifically go into almost these sales roles. I mean, am I right in saying that? I mean, it is more or less a sales role in those spaces, but having patient advocacy at top of mind and patient safety top of mind is a number one concern. And the other thing I like that you said too is, we talked about this at the beginning of this episode, is like, this is a growing industry. Technology is changing. There's so many products on the market. And so your education, you're constantly going and getting more education, more trainings. And so when they walk in, I mean, how many, I guess just estimated, how many products or different modalities do you have in your toolkit to offer somebody at this point?
Oh, I mean, there's so many. I mean, even just in filler types that I've used over the last 5 years, I mean, 20, 30. And then if you go to conferences in Europe, they will have 50 or 100 because their FDA or, their approval is a little different. But I think at the end of the day too, it's part of it is the product and part of it is the person behind that. And so you're kind of paying for both. I mean, experience and education and all of that stuff. There is, I mean, in some people there's a raw talent, but overall experience and education are going to shine through. And so really trusting, the person behind that and what they're recommending. And there's new stuff coming on the market all the time, but then there's also stuff that's getting pulled. I mean, there's products that has been on the market for the last 2 or 3 years that I won't speak of specifically, but that, I was educated on, I took trainings. I was never sold on the concept and I never used it on patients because I just wasn't sure of it. And sometimes, in aesthetics, it's a little different than, certain medical studies where there's all of this money behind it. And sometimes medical studies are funded by drug companies, but a lot of times in aesthetics, the studies are only funded by the companies that produce the products. So you have to be wary and use your experience and say, okay, they paid for this study And I know that no matter what, there has to be some kind of inherent bias in that, because they're not going to publish studies that show that their product isn't good.
Right.
So you have to take certain things with a grain of salt and use your education and your understanding and your patient experience and do that. I mean, there's a new product that came on the market, and I've only tried it on quote models. I have not used it on my own patients yet and had them pay for it yet, because I'm still not 100% confident and sure about it. So I think that's part of it too, is just new things are coming out every day, but there's also really good standard things that have been out for 20 years. I mean, Botox has been around for 20 years.
Yeah.
So again, you know, there's been a lot of other neurotoxins that have come on and come off the market. So you have
and all those FDA approvals for, you know, some fillers are only in certain areas and neuromodulators in certain areas and off label. And yeah, I mean, I think the educational standpoint is so huge. And maybe that's where we shift a little bit of the conversation is into how can people find and know, like when you're trusting somebody in this space, you're trusting somebody with your face, with your aesthetic wellness. What would be your advice for an individual just getting started on how to do the research for how to find a provider that they trust?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I would say, you know, number one, I would always go in for a consult and sit down and talk to that person prior to your treatment and get a sense of what they're recommending. They should always be able to offer and explain. I mean, I could not tell you how many times people have come to me who have been getting injectables for years. And I go through their history of what they've used and when, and have they had issues? Why did they like one thing more than the other? And I will explain things to them, and they will be like, no one's ever asked me any of these questions. No one has ever explained any of this stuff to me in the way that you have, so that I actually understand what I'm doing. Yeah. And no one's taken that time. I mean, and to me, it's sad, because obviously things are set up in a way where that's okay, where it's okay to not know what you're doing and why. And then there's also sad times where I have patients who have had things done that I can't really fix, that they were never, you know, given the opportunity to know that that was a risk, or that this is where they could have ended up. And I think that that's a huge part, is being able to trust the person that is doing your treatment, that they don't shut you down when you ask questions. Because a lot of times, you know, if people don't want to answer something, they might start being like, oh, that's not for you to worry about. That's something that I'll worry about. But it's your face, it's your body. You should be able to ask those questions. You should be able to have conversations. You should know that that person is a medical provider, and that they're practicing within their scope. You know, you should not be doing injectables as an esthetician. It's just, that's not appropriate. You should not be using skin pens or those injection pens on people's lips. And those just shouldn't be used anyways, but you should not be doing that ever. And so you should not be seeing somebody who's an esthetician who's injecting filler with a pen in your lips. You shouldn't be, you know, like, if somebody, even if they are a physician, they should still have credentials. They should still have experience. You know, there are times when people take a 1-day course and, you know, with an injector, and then they, you know, go on and start practicing, and that's not enough. That's not enough experience. So
right. Because it's like, you know, there's a big, vast difference between going and getting your hair or your nails done and getting injectables into your skin and your body. And it's like, you have to look at it as a medical service. It is, you have to go to a board certified individual, or somebody that has the credentials and the years of experience to back that up, because some of these things, like you said, you can't reverse.
Right.
And I mean, that's the downside of it, is just like, going to somebody that's not experienced, or, there's risks involved to all these things. I think, am I correct in saying, filler has maybe more risk than Botox, but still Botox has its own, minor risks as well.
Yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day too, it's just, are you seeing somebody that had the experience behind this, that not only has the medical credentials, but they haven't just started doing this 2 weeks ago. So I think that's part of it. Does your provider continue to have education? Do they go to conferences?
Mm-hmm.
Do they have good reviews online? Yeah. And also,
portfolio.
Even take that with a grain of salt sometimes, because people will give, there are some people who are like, oh, I will give you a discount if you write me reviews, or, social media is not always, there are a lot of people that have a bunch of followers and post a lot of things, but those also should be taken with a grain of salt. I think at the end of the day, it's kind of like anything in a sense, where it's like, you have to go somewhere where you feel comfortable, where your provider looks the way that you would want to look too. If your provider looks a little scary, then maybe they've lost sight of what's normal, which happens. I mean, I've definitely seen that. People will, develop almost a self-sense of like a body dysmorphia. Providers will start to see things that don't exist and start to fill in every line, and they don't look normal either. Your provider should look how you want. So if you look at them and you say they look natural, they look, I would see them, on the street and think they look great, and I feel comfortable with them. They're educated, they're professional, but they're approachable, then that's the right person for you. And if there's ever a situation where you're saying, this is not working for me anymore, then you need to sit back down with them and say, hey, I don't feel like I'm reaching my goals. And, I'm not happy with where we're at anymore. And then move on or find somebody else. But I definitely do discourage people from hopping around. So, there are some people who will seek, they'll go, oh, well, I'm just going to come get my Botox here today, and then I'm going to go there next week and get, my filler, and then I'm going to go to this other spa and get my lasers. It really becomes a little disconnected, and you don't really have a thorough treatment plan, and you don't really have you start to kind of not really get towards your goals, or not really know what's working, what's not.
Yeah. I think the key phrase that you use there is a treatment plan, where it's not a one-off service. It's like, how can we look to develop a long-term relationship, to develop your goals, work within your budget, work with wherever you're at in your life at the time. And because I see that a lot. I mean, like, oh my gosh, sometimes, Groupon or some of these like living social things, I'm like, please, people, don't go get Botox from something you found on Living Social. Like, develop relationships and work with people that you trust. And I guess one of the things that I think would be great for this segment is, what would be the top 5 questions that you would encourage individuals to ask when starting the relationship with a provider?
Well, I would almost say too, sit down by yourself first, before you go in for a consult, and write down what your goals are. Like, because I think that before you go in, say, okay, what am I willing to spend on this, right? In a year, in a month, right? And also acknowledge too that there are some times when it is expensive, but you also calculate how much you're spending on going out to eat, how much you're spending on buying nice purses, nice clothes, how much you're spending on your car payment every month. There are other things that you spend your money, and that's totally fine. That's your budget. You can do that however you want. However, if you want to go in and spend $100 on something every couple of months, you're just not going to see a good result. And that's okay, but you have to know that. So put down what you're willing to spend on this stuff, and also include what you're currently spending on Sephora over the counter, buys and stuff. And look at that too, because there's a lot of money that's wasted on things like that. Just impulse buys. So write down what you're willing to budget, either monthly or in a year. Write down what your priorities are or your concerns, So are you concerned with your skin's pigmentation? Are you concerned with your lines and wrinkles? Are you concerned with the way your eyes look? Okay. And then, so write that down, and then write down what like your no's are. Like, no, I do not want surgery. No, I do not want an injectable. No, I do not want something that's going to take a long time. I want to see results soon. Right. And just put that out there for yourself ahead of time, because I think a lot of people go in and they get overwhelmed with things and they don't really know what they want. So that's what I would say.
Yeah.
And then when you go in, first off, let somebody ask you your questions and go through those questions with you. What are your concerns? What have you done in the past, right? What are you doing with your skincare? What are you doing with your injectables, whatever? And then they'll work you through the different treatment options for the different concerns. And then questions you should ask, and I get asked a lot is, how long have you been doing this? What are the risks of the treatments, or risks or benefits? How long will it take to get to that, right? And then what would you do that, I haven't asked about? A lot of people ask that, where it's like they bring up stuff and, I go through all their concerns, but then I also will tell them things that I see. And then the other question, I always say, especially when I refer people out to plastic surgeons, is ask them how they deal with problems. Like, how do they deal with, complications, or, are they, quick to sell a procedure and do it? But then when things go wrong, how do they handle it? Are they there calling you? Are they there, dealing with you? Are they, following up? Are they, offering you all these different treatments and making sure you're okay and you feel okay? Or are they referring it out to their nurse and saying, I don't want to deal with this right now?
Yeah.
Because that happens too. So, how accessible are you to me? How can I email you? Can I call you if I have questions? And, if I get home and I have really bad bruising and it hurts, can I call you? Do you follow up with me? Right. So that is important. I mean, and to me, I'm pretty accessible for people. I mean, I follow up after treatments, via email or phone call. I'm there if they need to follow up afterwards. And I think that's really important. It's really easy to get somebody in and do the treatment, but how do you deal with what goes wrong?
And it goes back to that patient advocacy as well as that patient relationship. And that is long-term success for both you and those patients. So I'll put, I think I kind of wrote down a list of 7 different things as far as our conversation of different things that people can ask. And I love how you mentioned write down their goals. I think that's great. So I'll include that in the description of this as well for folks. And the other question that I have, and this goes back to a little bit in of the beginning, is when you go to a provider that does not have experience across different products, what are your thoughts there?
What do you mean? Do you mean like they only use one type, or they've never
one brand, one product, and that is the only thing that they recommend? If you're going to, I guess I think about the experience of like, if you're trying and learning about all the different products that are on the market, knowing what is best for your patient to recommend in whatever area versus just saying, nope, this one brand, this one device.
I tend to feel that happens more in kind of 2 scenarios. One, they're aligned with that brand, which can happen in a lot of different scenarios. I mean, there's hair salons where, they are seen as, they get a perk because they only carry this one line, right?
Okay.
And so it's the same with aesthetic companies or places, is that if they are aligned with one group, that they get more discounts on product buying, etc. And then there's also the scenario that it is costly to, open up different accounts with like the different products. And so as someone starting, they may carry only one or two brands. But I do believe that, number one, let's say you are a provider and you don't carry lasers, or you don't carry, you don't have that, offer those modalities, you still should recommend to your clients that they're a good candidate for this. I mean, I don't know how many times I've talked to people about plastic surgery, and it's not to push them into it, because some people that's not the right fit for them, but it's so that they know that that's an option for them. Because I don't want to do a treatment for someone for years, and they could have had a better outcome and an earlier treatment and been more, happy with the outcome of something that they could have done with a surgeon.
Absolutely.
And so it's
even if it means losing business sometimes too.
Oh, and I'm fine with that. I'd rather lose that business than somebody be happy. So,
so how does that look from like the collaboration standpoint? And do you feel like there's good collaboration in the industry?
I do. For some, I really do. I mean, I think that I refer patients out all the time to providers that I haven't even met, but I've just heard such good things about. I have people that reach out to me that I did injectable trainings with, that are in New York or Chicago or, in Charlotte. And they say, hey, are you doing Sculptra? Do you do that a lot? I have a client that lives in that area or is moving to your area. Can I send them to you? Mm-hmm. So there is really good collaboration. I mean, and I meet people all the time and they tell me, I meet them and they're like, oh, I go see so-and-so. I'm like, they're great. They're awesome. Like, you have a great injector. Like, so I think there is a lot of people that are great. And then there's some that are really not. And that's okay. So, but I would say too, I mean, from your standpoint, I mean, you've been somebody who's worked in aesthetics, and you've been somebody who's seen aesthetic providers. I mean, what really stands out to you in those scenarios? Like, is it how they treat and talk to you? Is it more of the skill and the outcome? What, what really stands out to you being in the chair?
Yeah, I would say on that side of things, like I think patient education is always going to be key. And going back to what you said about, understanding what their goals are, but spending that time with them and, helping them understand what are the risks and the downfalls. And, I've worked with Dr. Franklin Plastic Surgery for several years. And what I respect too is like, when it comes to collaboration, there are things where he's like, I am good at this. I specialize in this. I have no problem referring out to, XYZ about, who they should go to for those. And that's one thing that we talk about a lot is just like, working on the business side of the aesthetics industry. It's how can we provide more education? How can we help people feel more comfortable? How can we make it feel accessible to anyone and everybody, and not just something where you have to look a certain way and feel a certain way. And I think the other thing that I really like is when you talked about the aspect of a care plan or an aesthetic like overview. I think that's so important because I know that people will come to you and be like, I want Kim Kardashian lips, and they come with very thin lips. And it's like, unless you understand that there's going to be like a 5-part process to get you here safely and in a way that looks natural, then, you can find a provider that'll probably go and, do that for you. Put a few syringes into your lips or your cheeks in day one. but getting there to the safe point in which you feel that you're making progress, I think is another thing. And so I think patient education and setting those expectations, I think that is definitely key. And it's just an interesting industry. I have so much enjoyed, watching you grow and being able to, with Franklin, Dr. Franklin, being able to be in some of those plastic surgery cases and the surgeries.
Yeah.
That has been incredible. And to also have that one-on-one patient interaction, if they're open to giving a testimonial, it's the difference that you see in their confidence and the brightness of how they feel after. I mean,
I think
it's a gift.
I came into this industry, I mean, people, some people were a little negative about it. I'd gone from, they were like, oh, well, before you were just doing so much good, like you were helping people who were having lung transplants that were 18, with cystic fibrosis. And they were like, don't you feel bad that you're going into something that's corrupt or that's this and that? And at first I was a little hurt by that, but then I see the impact that it has on people. I see so many people come in that sit in my chair and they don't want to look like Kim Kardashian. They want to feel little like they're putting themselves first for the first time in a long time. And they feel good. I mean, I see people who have gone through a lot and they're like, oh, my family member passed away recently and I just have been looking forward to coming in and seeing you and just feeling a little better.
Yes.
And it's not, I'm not there to look at somebody. I don't judge people. I don't meet people at parties and like look at their face. I'm like, oh, wow.
Come see me for Botox.
I don't say that. I don't look at people like that. I just, for me, if you ask, then I'll say stuff to people, if they want to know. But I think overall, it's like, well, I don't want to make you look like Kim Kardashian. I'm not good at that. I don't do that kind of stuff. I want to make you look like you and just a little refreshed and to feel good and confident about yourself. And my patients, you won't be able to like see them on the street and say, oh, that person's had work done.
Yeah.
And that to me is good work. I mean, it should look like you. You should just feel a little bit refreshed and you should see the improvement in the health of your face, your skin.
And your skin.
Yeah. And I would say too, there is such a, you got into the concept of making it accessible and educating people, but also there's also the portion of education from somebody who's not a professional. And I think that is, don't come in with TikTok, fears of this one person had this one complication from it and everyone's so afraid of it. And it's like, well, that person's not a medical provider. They're not educating you on the medical concerns or risks and benefits. That's a person that's giving you an anecdotal experience and you don't know all the stuff that comes from behind that. So I think there is such an important component of education, just like you're in the hospital and you're preparing for a procedure and knowing the risks and benefits and what's it going to look like afterwards and all of this stuff. However, what happened to your neighbor that one time, it's not necessarily going to be what happened to you.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So I think, yes, ask those questions, talk to your provider, but don't allow one person's experience or what you see on social media or what, the deep depths of the internet says to you, allow you to not, seek out a consult or not to talk to somebody or to think that that's absolutely going to happen to you. Because if done correctly, these are very safe, affordable, and well done, actually pretty common treatments, so.
One last question before we wrap up here, for nurses or providers that are thinking about getting and switching maybe over to the aesthetics industry. What do you think that, I guess to formulate the question, As far as providers that have experience working in a hospital care setting prior to moving into aesthetics, or, do you think that there's benefit for them going and spending a few years working in the ICU or, in the hospital setting and then coming into aesthetics? Or do you see that nurses are coming straight from nursing school and trying to go into aesthetics now?
I would say most nurses have experience doing something else. I don't know that I've met anybody who has only ever done aesthetics and this is just right where they started, unless they were an esthetician who then went back to nursing school and then was somehow already in the industry.
Yeah.
Working in a plastic office or something. Yeah. And that is fine. I think that would make it a little difficult being in nursing school if all your mindset was ever to do is aesthetic, going through the schooling process and having to work in hospitals, having the education of nursing school doesn't go into anything for aesthetics. So you're really just getting the degree to then do, what you would like to do. So I think that would be a little bit difficult, to be honest. But I'm not saying that's not possible. I think that it is really important to know, my nursing background allowed me to know how to problem solve, to know how to do treatments and procedures, to know how to talk to people, to know how to educate people about, risks and benefits. And I mean, obviously I couldn't do this if I wasn't a nurse or a nurse practitioner, but I wouldn't change my background and have just gone straight into this. I think then I wouldn't be as well-rounded as a provider. But at the same time, I mean, I should not go back to being, a bedside nurse. I wouldn't be good at it at this point in my career, or it would take a lot of learning to do that again. So that's part of it. But
so pros and cons.
I would say though, if you know that this is all you'd ever wanted to do, then just do that. I just didn't know. I didn't know at the time in my career, and I loved the other stuff I did. I mean, I really did. So
I learned a lot.
I learned a lot, and I loved being an ICU nurse. I loved the fast-paced environment, but for only a period of time. It got exhausting and emotionally draining. But I would say if somebody is going to nursing school and this is all they ever want to do, then do that. Start get your foot in the door somewhere, start working at a plastic surgeon's office on the front desk while you're in school, be willing to do things with, that will take financial or, time frame sacrifices. Because I think that that's part of it too, is that people are willing to spend how much on going to school, but they won't spend, $5,000 taking a course or going to a conference. So I think, weighing that out and deciding where you want to put your time and energy and really investing in it and knowing that you might not get into the industry immediately.
Yeah. So, I think that's great advice. That's great advice. Well, Christin, how can folks find you? You're on Instagram, and what is your handle there?
It is Beauty Jewels _NP. And then I also have my personal Instagram, which is mostly my dog. So
awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to have all this linked, and I so appreciate you sharing your perspective and your journey with us. I think it's super helpful. Having me. Of course. And like I said, I will have some of those questions for folks that are just exploring this space in the description of this post. So stay tuned and go follow Christin. She's amazing, amazing, amazing. So thank you again, Christin. We'll chat soon.
Okay.